So, all right, we'll begin. So, I'm Sankalp, and welcome to today's webinar titled Demystifying Quant Investing. This is the part two. So, last week we had all connected, and let me just introduce you to our company PMSCIF World. We are one of India's leading new age modern investment platform focusing on alternates. We do a lot of knowledge based and good content based webinars throughout the year, and we've been covering a lot of diverse topics like quants to special situations to entrepreneurship, and we strive to do it ahead, and we request your encouragement and participation. You can visit our YouTube channel to subscribe to all our videos and get updates. And so today I will now introduce you to the session. So we have two very special guests, Miss Sashi Singh. She's the senior partner at IIFL Asset Management. She is someone who carries 2 decades of industry experience and is very intuitive and insightful on how investors react and what investors are looking for, and that just is the right mix in an asset manager you would want. And with her is Parijat, who is obviously going to talk about quant investing and is a specialist in that, and has done a lot of good work in this area. He was involved in high frequency trading in the Americas as well as for a brief time in India, and he is a graduate of IIT Bombay or IIT Delhi, Parijat?
IIT Bombay.
IIT Bombay, and he's also a CFA too. So that's a rare combination, and we are glad to have him. So I'll just do a quick recap of the last session before I hand it over to Sashi. So on the last session, what we saw was essentially a quant investing 101, where we got to know that the most quintessential quant product is probably the indices, where there's a strict rule and a stringent kind of an idea of what will make to the index, which might be market cap or something else, depending on the kind of index. So Nifty and Sensex are probably the most popular quant portfolios in the country. And we also got to understand that how a simple quant portfolio can be created by simple company statistics like price to book and ROE, and you combine them and create a ranking based system, and you start your quant journey there. So it's basically adhering to a rule or adhering to some a scope of what you're going to buy or what you're going to look at. So that's what quant was, as explained to us on the last episode. So today we're going to up the game a bit, and without much further ado, I will now hand it over to Sashi and then Parijat eventually. So over to you, Sashi. Sashi, you're on mute.
Thank you, Sankalpo, and very good evening to all of you. While Sankalpo's very nicely recapped what we did last time as introducing what is quant investing, and today we have Parijat with us to take you deeper into how do you go and select which quant fund to invest, or how do you assess a quant fund, what goes into a quant fund, what are the factors selected, what is the difference which will make one quant fund do better than the others, or as an investor, how much allocation should you have to a quant strategy as compared to another normal equity strategy. So we have all these questions and more which will be answered by Parijat today, and please feel free to keep adding your questions on the chat box so that we can make it more interactive. Over to you, Parijat.
Thanks, Shashi, and thanks, Sankalpo. It's a tall order, actually. I think there's a lot of stuff to say, but I'm going to try and keep it as short as I can. And I think the questions here are going to be very, I think that we should probably have more questions because this is very practical things that we're going to touch upon this week. Last week we talked about how do you build a quant strategy, which, to be honest, as an investor, that's probably not something you're going to do on your own. It's just important to understand broadly what goes into it. This week it's going to be more practical in how do you actually, when somebody comes and pitches a fund at you and says, and this is going to happen increasingly, more and more quant funds are going to come your way. Somebody, say I'm using AI and ML and I'm using 50 million data points and this and that. how do you not get overwhelmed by that, and have the right questions to ask, and why do you even invest in a quant fund? That's basically the idea. Okay. So that's what we're going to talk about. Sankalpo, if you could please put up the slides.
I'm just turning on. Just a second.
Sure.
So, while the slide is loading, I just ran a poll. I'm not sure if you can see it. I just asked, I'm a lot more aware about quant as an investment technique after the last call. 51% said yes. So I think, you've done some good work there, and, a lot is to be done. Like half still said that they still want some clarity. So that's the perspective there.
Okay.
Parijat, your voice is a little slow. So can you either speak louder, get nearer the mic?
Yeah, I'm trying to. I think, is this better? I'll either hold it up or something. This is better, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So
slides are up, Parijat. So what do you?
Thanks. So, like last time, I think the first, I like to start my presentations with questions. So here are two people. Obviously, the one on the right, I'm pretty sure everybody recognizes. This is Warren Buffett. He's got 60 plus years of 20% annualized performance. But the person on the left, he's also got a great track record. This is almost a 30-year track record now, 39% annualized return. It's almost twice as much annually. How many people know who this man is? You can just sort of type out his name into the chat box.
We just run a poll for this, Parijat.
Okay.
So.
Parijat, this is a difficult one.
No, I definitely saw some people in attendance who I'm sure know. Okay.
Yeah, someone in written: Ray Dalio, John Bogle, Jim Simons.
Okay.
Gregory Zucker.
Okay.
Mr. Renaissance.
Yes. So at least a few people have got it. Somebody said Jim Simons. Yes. Rentec, Renaissance.
Yeah.
So in fact, this is Jim Simons. He's an extremely reticent man. Normally, very few people obviously don't recognize him. He doesn't do interviews. He's a math geek. He's in fact somebody who's done who's got awards for his work in theoretical mathematics, and he runs a firm called Renaissance Technologies, and Renaissance Technologies runs multiple funds. The most famous one of which is a fund called Medallion. Now, Medallion is the fund that has generated 39% annualized return, and this, by the way, is after a 44% performance fee. So it's an incredible record, and this entire fund is run by physicists, mathematicians. They specifically, they do not hire people with any Wall Street credentials. So if somebody spent time on Wall Street, they will not hire that person, and this is the kind of track record they have generated. So this is obviously just to pique your interest and to see how exciting quant can be. But I'm quickly going to also tamper it down, and I'm going to basically say that, look, these sort of returns are usually not available to investors. In fact, the Medallion fund that they run is a $10 billion fund. The entire money in this fund actually is only of Jim Simons and the employees of Renaissance. So they don't actually allow outside money into this fund. There's a specific reason for that. The reason is that their strategy, unlike Warren Buffett's strategy, if you call it a strategy, is that they can only deploy so much money into the market. So even though, for example, they generate 40-50% returns every year on that 10 billion, it's not like that they can take that 4-5 billion that they've generated and put that back into the strategy. They have to keep taking it out, so that the fund is basically just capped at 10 billion. Of course, 10 billion is not a small amount, but when you know how to make a strategy that gets that kind of returns, you basically just put in all your own money and you don't let outsiders invest in something like that. So 2 points here. One, quant can actually make pretty amazing returns. Two, such stupendous returns are usually not available to investors outside of the people who actually make these strategies. But you certainly still can get strategies that that will outperform the market by 2, 3, 4% per annum. And I was just earlier today I was working out, even if you can beat the market by 2% per annum, and let's say the market returns 10% per annum, and your strategy, what your investment is generating 12% per annum, you can over 10 years your market will be 160 and you'll be like 210, 220, almost 50% higher. So even small differences in performance can add up to a lot, and that's what quant investing really counts on, that you rack up these incremental performances over the market over long periods of time to get really outsized returns. As an asset class globally, if you just think of quant strategies globally manage almost $1 trillion in assets. There are some real giants in this area, largely based in the US. By comparison, India, by my reckoning, I don't think there are like proper statistics available, but in India, this number is less than $250 million. So maybe something like 1,500 crores or something, 1,500, 2,000 crores is what proper quant strategies are managed in India, compared to $1 trillion or almost 70 lakh crores in the Western, more developed markets. But that is changing. I think India is picking up, quant strategies. Historically, I think, people have said that we are, as a country, we are not mature enough to, the market is not mature enough to invest in quants. I don't think that's really the reason. I think investors are always pretty savvy when it comes to finding the best ways to make money to get returns. I think the reason this has not happened so far and is now beginning to happen in India is this little chart here. There are 3 things that drive performance in investing. One is informational edge. I mentioned this last time briefly. Informational edge, analytical edge, and behavioral edge. Basically, you need to have some kind of advantage over the market if you want to beat the market. And when the markets are not very mature, information itself becomes a very big source of advantage. Some fund managers, etc., can have better access to companies, the communications, they just know more stuff, etc. And information dissemination is not great. My father used to tell a story that back in the day, in the 90s, there were people who would stand outside company offices, company corporate offices, and when the results used to come out, they used to first be put up on the notice boards outside the company before they were properly disseminated. And these guys would look at those results and call in and tell the brokers what's happening, and that's a straight up informational edge. Obviously that does not happen today, but a more sophisticated version of that happens. But as the markets mature, all of that keeps going away. The field gets more and more level with time, and the focus shifts. The way to generate returns then becomes analytical. Who can make more sense and who can generate more insights from the data that is actually available? And that is where using algos, using systems can actually add a fair bit of advantage over humans. I mean, we are just inherently slower. We have biases. We can make mistakes. Programs typically will not make that kind of mistake. So as the market gets more informationally efficient, algos and systematic strategies actually start getting an edge over humans. And finally, the behavioral edge, that is always a stronghold for quant strategies. Humans are humans. They are the ones who have behavioral problems. Quant strategies and computers obviously don't. So that is always an advantage. But between the informational edge and analytical edge, as the markets get more informationally efficient, the analytical edge begins to play a more and more important role. And which is why, as India's market is getting more efficient, better data sources are available, quant strategies are now coming to the fore. and that too, it's not like the data starts coming in today and the quant strategies can come in. You need a lot of historical data, 10-15 years at least of data to build statistically valid strategies, which is why the data started coming in mid 2000s, where it actually became systematized. Some good databases became available, and as the database has built up, now those strategies are beginning to come into the market, and it's intensifying, and interesting things can begin to happen. So that's one of the big reasons why you will now see increasing quant strategies being pitched to you. Now, quant strategy, so again, so if you talk to any distributors in the financial intermediaries, they'll tell you that investors in India, basically they'll only invest for alpha. They're only looking to invest for performance. That sounds logical enough, and because of that, we'll talk a little about that, quant strategies as sources of alpha. But there are other elements, there are other reasons to invest in quant strategies, and we'll get into that as well in a minute. So if you just think about quant strategies as sources of alpha, there are lots of different kinds of things that are available globally, as well as now they are beginning to happen in India. This is a very arbitrary classification of strategies. There you can slice them up in lots of different ways. These are just some long-short strategies. A long-short strategy is one where the strategy will, go long some shares and go short other shares, companies. So this is usually in India because of the market structure. This is done in only F&O stocks. And here the intention is to not be correlated to the market, or be as little correlated to the market as possible. These are usually attempting to be what are known as absolute return strategies. And you're trying to make money no matter whether the market is up or whether the market is down. And there are lots of different variations in the long short strategies, but that's one big category. This in India, as far as I understand, will only be available to you in the form of AIFs. Since shorting is not allowed in the mutual fund space, this is usually available only in. So we are saying long short strategies is one category. Trading strategies. This sounds like almost everything is a trading strategy, but what I mean specifically by trading strategies is things like so there are two broad approaches to building a quant strategy. One is where you choose, you build portfolios. You say that okay, there are certain characteristics based on which you are going to choose the stocks, and there's a certain rules for portfolio construction, and you build a portfolio, and then you rebalance that portfolio periodically. Others are trading strategies where you look at individual stocks and you look at what is happening with an individual stock at any given point of time. So it could be like a very simple technical strategy. Let's say you could have a strategy which says that whenever a stock crosses the 50-day moving average and goes up, I'll buy it, and things like that. So where you're not looking at it on a portfolio basis at all, you are looking at specific events as they happen, and you're sort of trying to capture those opportunities. Those are trading strategies. These are actually the more common ones. As far as I understand, even in 2010, 11, people were offering these kinds of strategies. They were doing it in a bespoke manner. Brokers used to offer this, where basically what people used to do manually, all sorts of technical trading, charting, etc. They tried to automate and build these strategies. They actually, it's not necessarily a bad thing. They actually can perform quite well. There are lots of things that you want to check when somebody pitches you that strategy, and we can check about this, talk about this later. But so that's another category. And then finally, the kind of strategy that I'm more interested in personally are what are known as factor strategies, where I think it's, so they're just called factor strategies. The idea is that you pick stocks based on certain characteristics. I gave a very simple example last time. I said if you just buy companies with low price to book and high ROEs, then and you just pick like the top 30 of them and build a portfolio, and you rebalance annually. That's something like what you could call it what is known as a multi-factor strategy. This is the this is one entire category. We'll actually spend more time talking about these kind of strategies. So that's when you look at, and you know, they are also interesting from an alpha perspective. But again, the more interesting thing to me is quant strategies as investment solutions. And you know, this sounds like a very salesy kind of statement. You know, people love to call their products as solutions. But in fact, if you think about you know, a lot of investing products, they're not only about just generating returns. There are lots of different things that investment products are could be used to do, you know, in your overall investment portfolio or your overall, you know, life and what you need to achieve in terms of financial goals. And that's where a lot of these strategies actually make sense also. So, for example, you know, you've heard of the fact that the most important thing that determines outcomes is your allocation strategy, how you're allocating your money. Now, when they say allocation, typically they mean allocating between, say, debt and equity and real estate and gold, etc. But even within, let's say, an equity investing universe, you can actually allocate to different segments of the market. We talked about what segments of the market means. We'll get there again in a minute. Once you've done the allocation, right? So, for example, you might say that, look, I want a low volatility portfolio. I don't want, I like, you know, I want to invest in the equity market, but I want to make sure that my portfolio is a fairly low volatility portfolio. I'm okay to have slightly lower returns, but I want to make sure that the volatility in the portfolio remains low. Now, typically, if you are looking for, say, a mutual fund, you will not find a pure equity portfolio that will say that I'm going to optimize this portfolio for low volatility. Typically, that's not available as of today. That, you know, that people say that I'm going to optimize this a portfolio to buy only high quality companies. So a fund manager might tell you, but if you look at a fund, it will still be maybe what is known as a flexi cap fund or a focused fund. But you know, if you say that, no, look, I just want to buy high quality companies, is there a product that lets me do that? That may not be available. So what will happen is your maybe your investment advisor will tell you, look, you should buy the fund from XYZ fund manager because he's known to have a quality bias. Okay, he knows how to buy, or he likes to buy high quality stocks, so you should invest there. The problem with that sort of thing is it's possible that fund manager is very good, but what ends up happening is if you have bought that instrument, that mutual fund specifically to buy quality stocks, there is really no guarantee that fund manager is going to stick to it. Right? He might have a bias, but it's not necessarily that he's optimizing for quality. And I'll show you some examples in a minute about what you know, how that actually manifests. But so the point is, you've allocated. You say, I want to buy cheap stocks. What a quant strategy can do for you is make sure that, you know, whatever portfolio is built is optimized exactly for what you want in your portfolio, right? So that because, you know, a mutual fund, that when you buy a mutual fund, it does not live in isolation. You've got a lot of other investments, you've got a lot of different exposures, and you might want to fill a specific kind of gap in the exposures you have. I will explain what that means. It sounds a little abstract. Anyway, so that's stock selection. So algos basically given a specific mandate, say buy cheap stocks in large companies. Algos make sure that they do exactly that, and they do it in a risk controlled way. And then finally, the third element of investing is timing. And like I mentioned, there are some trading strategies that do that, you know, try to do exactly that. And some of them definitely do a good job of it as well. But it's harder. There's more likelihood when you buy these, invest in these strategies. It's possible. The likelihood of overfitting is higher, etc. And we'll see how that happens. So you want to make an allocation, and a quant strategy can sort of make sure that it is true to label. It is getting you exactly the kind of exposures that you are looking for. That's what I mean when I say, you know, quant strategies as investment solutions. So now talking about allocation, I said, you know, different slices or different segments of the market. You remember this cake if you were here for the last week's session. We talked about how if buying an index fund is like taking a slice out of this cake. You get equal proportions of everything in this cake: the fondant, the cream, the cake part. You've got all of that in equal proportions as the rest of the cake. That's what buying an index fund is like. But we also saw that some people have, some kids probably like fondant more than the cake, right? And if you are like me, you probably just get rid of all the cream and just eat the cake part, right? The sponge. You like that bit, etc. So you can have a preference for this or that part of the market. And what do I mean? What is the translation of that in terms of other parts of the market is, so one is obviously large cap, mid cap, small cap, or sectors, healthcare and consumer discretionary, consumer staples, etc. But you can also talk about these, say five. These are 5 factors. There are some who will come and give you more. These are the more well-known ones. What are known as value stocks, basically cheap stocks, from price to book, price to earning basis, or whatever. Cheap stocks. It's been found by long research that if you buy shares in companies that are relatively cheap, over long periods of time, they tend to do better. Similarly, growth, and I've put growth separately. Typically, that becomes a part of quality. Quality includes, high ROE companies. So there are a few fund managers, for example, who talk a lot about how in India it actually makes sense to buy high quality companies. And over 10, 15 years, they've done phenomenally well for investors. So you can actually invest in just that part of the market. And what a quant strategy can do for you is, say, instead of taking any subjective judgment about what is a high quality company, you can mathematically define what high quality means and just build portfolios for that. So if you are into those kinds of companies, you can buy a fund that does that for you. Then there's momentum. Momentum just means companies that have done well over the recent past, say over the last 6 months or the last 1 year. And this sounds like a very trader kind of thing, that traders tend to do this, but it's actually found that over very long periods of time, again, and in lots of different markets, in the US market and everywhere in the world, buying stocks that have done well recently actually yields a pretty good return and actually beats the market over time. You have to do it systematically, but it does work. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with actually having some of your money sitting in just chasing high performance stocks. Again, you don't want all your money in any one of this part of the market. That's an important point. But so for example, let's just move on. Here is the top holdings of a very famous fund in India. There's a very well-known fund, has very large AUM. Okay, just eyeball the stocks. You've got State Bank of India, ICICI, Larsen & Toubro, all pretty large cap, good-looking stocks, right? This is another fund, also very famous. Again, you've got HDFC Bank, TCS. At first glance, the more people who look at the market in more detail might be able to tell the difference in these two portfolios. But to a layman, it just looks like these are all well-known companies and there is some allocation to them, right? And it's hard to tell the difference between these two portfolios, except for maybe slightly more seasoned investors. This is you look at these two funds, and like I said, you might be able to tell that somebody has a greater sector exposure, whatever, but you can actually look at it from a completely different lens, and something very interesting comes out here. The first fund that we saw was actually largely composed of, or had a very large exposure to, what are known as cheap stocks, right? And this is measured very, very quantitatively. There's nobody subjectively saying, oh, this is a cheap stock. This is mathematically determined that, on average, these stocks would be considered cheaper than the rest of the market. So this first fund, say, compared to the benchmark, which has only 47% exposure to, and just take this with a pinch of salt. This is not exactly how factor exposures work. This is mostly to explain. But if the benchmark had like 47% exposure to cheap stocks, this first fund has 72% exposure to cheap stocks, right? On the other hand, it has very low exposure to high growth companies or highly profitable companies. So this fund manager is very good at picking stocks that are cheap, right? And he finds he's done well over a period of time. And so, for example, somebody had actually told you to buy this fund, right? And you have invested in this fund, and you're like, okay, I've made my equity allocation and all my money is being managed by this fund manager because I know that he has a good track record. He knows how to pick good stocks. I've given him all my money to manage, or a large chunk of my money to manage. What's happening now to your portfolio is that you don't have any exposure, or you have very little exposure to companies with high profitability. And like we saw, high profitability companies over the last 10-15 years, they've done well. So what if all your money is sitting in this one fund, in the first fund, then you've missed out from all the benefit from owning high quality companies, right? And you don't necessarily want to give that up. You want at least some of it to come from these high quality companies. You don't want to miss out on the returns that you get from owning those kinds of companies, that part of the market. On the other hand, if you look at Fund 2 has a relatively low exposure to cheap stocks. Okay, and that means, but again, we've seen that over long periods of time, cheap stocks do well. And in fact, over the last 3 months, especially since the start of February, these cheap stocks have actually outperformed everything. And they've done very well. So if you were only invested in fund number 2, because you like the fund manager, you trust the fund manager, he's got a great track record, and he has actually generated performance. But if you were only invested in that fund, then you would have missed out quite a bit on this recent rally in the value sector of the market. So point is that if you know that this particular fund that I already have, or even the total exposure that I have in the equity market has some kind of bias, right? So for example, if you have a lot of investment either in fund 1, or even if you yourself pick stocks and you are very good at picking certain kinds of stocks, then you will have some kind of bias in your portfolio. So what you can do with a quant strategy basically is that then you don't have to look for a very long track record. You don't have to find somebody who's been investing for last 10 years, 15 years, he's got a track record, and you know that he has a very good track record at picking quality stocks. So you don't have to necessarily go find another fund manager that can plug this gap that you have, this growth and profitability gap that you have in fund by investing in fund number 1. You can simply, if the right products are available in the market, right quant strategy, you could simply buy a quality quant fund. So what that does is you've got exposure to that part of the market. Maybe it's not fantastic stock selection, but it'll get you most of the way there, right? So you don't miss out on what kind of performance you could have gotten if you were sitting in a fund number 1. You could just invest in that other fund. Similarly, if you are invested in fund number 2 and you understand that, look, this fund manager has a quality bias and it doesn't tend to buy the cheap stocks in the market, and you want to have exposure to that, you could go and buy a systematic or a quant value fund. And finally, even fund number 2 also has low exposure to momentum. So you could also go and buy a momentum fund. Say you want to make some money from the stocks that are doing well recently and they're running up, and you want to participate in that. And again, you could do that on your own, but you are not that kind of person. You're not the kind of person who's looking at the market every day. So you want a fund. So you can either try and find a fund manager who likes to buy momentum stocks. And by the way, no fund manager typically is going to admit to you that they like buying momentum stocks. So you will only find a quant product that can actually do that for you. So, and finally, volatility also. So basically the idea is if you've got certain goals or you've got certain gaps in your portfolio, one way is to try and find a manager with a track record and who you can be sure is going to stick to that philosophy. Or you can buy a quant fund, which is practically defined by that particular factor, and so you can be sure that you will constantly get exposure to that factor in your portfolio, and you can enjoy that part of the returns from the market as well. So that's broadly what I have to say about just how you think about where why quant strategies matter. You can either choose it for alpha, or you can think of it as augmenting your portfolio and fixing gaps in your portfolio, and using it for that purpose. And so based on what risk tolerance you have, and based on what kind of imbalances exist in your portfolio, we'll be able to allocate to the quant strategies to fill those gaps. Now, the bigger question, honestly, this I think is something that becomes very, very relevant as more and more quant strategies start hitting the market. I think the last year itself has seen several, maybe you've been pitched some. And the problem is that the way you assess a quant strategy is actually quite different from how you would assess a traditional, fund manager based strategies or discretionary strategies. These quant strategies have to be assessed very, very differently. And unfortunately, not many of us are equipped to do that very well. We are not equipped to do that very well because one, we feel scared. There's just a lot of jargon thrown at us. Somebody saying, I use AI and I use 50 million data points and things like that. And we don't feel equipped to question what is going on. So the default is to fall back and say, okay, what are the credentials of the fund manager? And can you show me a track record? Now, the problem with that is that, quant strategies have only come into their own very recently. And you're not going to find, or you'll find very few examples of people with 10-year track records. So how do you assess? And are you going to wait 10 years to buy a quant strategy? The answer has to be no. And the good thing is that because of the way, and we talked about this last week, because quant strategies can be back tested and you can see the record of how it would have actually done, you don't always need an actual live track record. Okay. But having said that, obviously, anybody can build a strategy that fits the past, and that is no guarantee that it's going to do well. So what you want to be thinking about is twofold. One, where this strategy fits in your portfolio, and two, whether the claims that are being made are sensible and likely to work, or are these overfitted and just some sort of jargon being thrown at you. You want to be able to assess that. So you can begin by asking these three questions. This just sort of places it in a context within the quant strategy universe. First question is, what is the portfolio construction approach in a strategy? So within that, of course, like I mentioned in the start, there will be strategies that don't have a portfolio construction approach at all. That's not necessarily a bad thing. They might be trading strategies and they don't necessarily think in terms of overall portfolio construction. They are opportunistic. These strategies can obviously be, very often be sitting in cash, because if there aren't enough opportunities, then they might be sitting on cash. And even so, they might actually generate pretty decent returns over a period of time. But this is the first question. You want to ask how the portfolio is being built. Is there specific? Is it a sector neutral kind of thing, or is it focusing on specific factors? For example, the kinds we saw. How are they choosing to build the portfolio? The second question is, what is the frequency of transactions? So this can be right from an intraday strategy. If it's an AIF, it can be intraday. It could be a strategy that rebalances every day or transacts every day at close, all the way to strategies that are rebalanced or that basically trade only once every 3 months, 6 months, or sometimes even a year. And that has a big bearing actually on how the questions you ask about backtesting, which we'll get to in a minute. I have listed out all the questions you can ask, but this is a very important factor. How frequently is the strategy going to trade? And finally, this is very related to the first one, is whether the strategy is a trading strategy or an event-driven strategy. For example, the example I gave, that something that buys any given security when something happens in that security, it breaks through a certain technical resistance or whatever, versus the factor-driven strategy, which is not trying to forecast returns per se, but it is trying to just build a portfolio with securities of a certain characteristic. So that's sort of the taxonomy. You can break up strategies into how frequently they trade, whether they are factor driven or whether they are event driven, and based on their portfolio construction approach. Now, the big elephant in the room for quant, which is, how do you know when somebody is pitching you a strategy and it shows you 15-year results. Look, we've outperformed the index by 4% every year for the last 15 years. How do you know that this is not something that, I mean, after all, you can always build a strategy and keep tuning it till the point it gives you the answer that you want. And then you can go to somebody and say, look, this works. How do you make sure that that is not what is happening in a given strategy that is being pitched to you? There's no foolproof method as an outsider, but there are some very interesting questions you can ask. Okay, so just to get some sense on how you intuitively think about this. Say there are two different strategies being pitched to you. The first guy is pitching you a strategy where they say, we only consider buying a stock when it falls below 1.5 times the book value. Okay, so anytime a stock is below 1.5 times price to book, they will consider buying it. And there's another strategy where they say, we've optimized these cutoffs, price to book cutoffs based on AI-based AI models, so that for each sector, we have a different price to book cutoff. So it's possible that in cement, we'll buy it below 1.4 times. And then in metals, we'll buy it below 1.7 times, etc. So now the question is, if these two strategies were pitched to you, and just if you were asked to guess where there might be more overfitting, if they both show same performance, where there is more likely to be overfitting in the data that they are in the way they've built the strategy, what would you guess? Strategy 1 or strategy 2?
I think somebody again commented no voice, but I'm able to hear you clearly, and the polls are also coming in. So we've got some statistics from the poll. The question that we asked, 38% of around 40% people want to invest in strategy 1, and 60% in strategy 2.
Okay, I think numbers are still coming in, but I think we can call it even. It's very close to 50-50. So the question here, see, it's very interesting to see this. The point I'm trying to make is that strategy 2 is actually more likely to be overfitted. Okay, so that's the specific aspect of the strategy that we are trying to guess. The more parameters there are in a given strategy, so it looks very fancy, right? Because you've got AI models, and it seems like, oh, this seems to be a very good strategy because they've thought about every sector individually, etc. So at one level, that makes sense. You would think that a strategy that does only one fixed value, that is more naive compared to a strategy which has different parameters for each sector. The risk, there's a very big risk in the second strategy that there has been overfitting. That because think about how when somebody is building that strategy, what are they doing? They are, say, looking at 10-year performance, right? What they can do is they can start off with 1.5 price to book cutoff for every sector, and they run the strategy, and they see it doesn't perform well. And then what they can do is they can see, I see that because of this cutoff in the pharma sector, I ended up picking a bad stock. So let me adjust this for the pharma sector. Let me adjust the price to book ratio that I'm going to use. Right, and then adjust that and they run it again. And then they find that, okay, now the performance is being pulled down because of some other sector, and I'm going to change that. The more you do that, the more likely that what you are overfitting the strategy. This is very counterintuitive. When you are learning over time, you want to do this. But when quant strategies are built, if there are too many parameters, so consider, say, assume there are 11 sectors. The first strategy is using a single parameter. Okay, and he's just optimizing one parameter, and he's gotten certain performance, versus strategy 2, which has got 11 different parameters to play around with. The more parameters there are in a strategy, the more chances are that it is overfitted, and in the future it might not work. Okay, and keyword is it might not work, and the odds that there has been overfitting is higher. That's the only point. And overfitting is something you definitely want to avoid. Okay. Here's another example. Okay, this is a slightly different setup. So strategy 1, the person pitching this strategy is saying, our strategy is very awesome because we were able to predict the 2008 crash. So our strategy got out of the market in time. and we were able to forecast the 2014 rally also, and so we maybe went and leveraged. Okay, so this is one guy. In fact, we've built a quant model that does that. And strategy 2 says, look, over the last 180 months, say that is over the last 15 years, our strategy managed to avoid 70% of the bad months. But we still missed, obviously we missed, because of that, we also missed some good months, but we missed only 20% of the good months while we avoided 70% of the down months. Which strategy are you likely to trust more from an overfitting perspective? Which do you think is more likely to have been overfitted? Again, there's a poll. You can choose.
Okay, so I asked, where will I invest? So
yeah.
I think I think people are more clearer on this, divergence here.
Yeah. Yeah. So so strategy 2 clearly is the more preferred one in this case. So here, obviously, it's a good thing that the intuitive answer is also the correct one. And I say correct one in the sense that, yes, obviously, you would love a strategy that, if a fund manager was able to avoid these crashes, etc., you would be quite impressed. But again, in quant strategies, what happens is you've got the benefit of hindsight, right? So it's actually quite simple if you're just trying to fit two events, right? And if you can if you've got a model that can look at the GDP and the interest rate and, a bunch of parameters, it's quite straightforward actually to build a simple model, which would, in Jan of 2008 or December of 2007, it will give you a sell signal. And just before 2014 elections, it will give you a buy signal. It's quite straightforward to do that. And the key operating point here is this. In strategy 1, you are basically only trying to predict your strategy that you've built is only trying to predict two different things, right? Two events it is trying to predict. Whereas in strategy 2, you are trying to build a prediction model that fits 180 events, right? So it's much harder to fit a strategy to 100 and correctly guess on 180 events compared to trying to fit on just 2 events or 4 or 5 events. So and this is, by the way, this is very common. There are strategies, a lot of strategies will get pitched to you over time, which will tell you that we are able to predict when we should be in the market and when we should not. Now, both of these strategies are doing that, right? Both of them are trying to time the market, but one of them only took 2 decisions over 8 years or 10 years or 15 years, whereas this other one is taking a decision every month and acting on it and still is managing to generate some performance. Then the chances that the second strategy is actually more effective over time. Again, this is chances. There are bad ways to do the second one as well. But the chances that the claim in the second strategy is stronger than the first one is much higher. I think this is something that you just have to think about. And when specific things get pitched to you, you will have to try a way to map this thought, right? So the first thing, how many parameters are you using? The more parameters you are using and the more parameters you are tuning in your strategy, the more likely there is overfitting. And the fewer events that you are trying to predict in your test period, the more likely or more easy that you will end up overfitting. So these are 2 big things that you can pay attention to when you are reading any strategy and trying to decide whether there is a risk that the strategy is overfit. Okay, the next thing to ask is, what is the core claim within the strategy, right? What is it saying? For example, so again, it doesn't matter whether they are saying that we are using AI or whether we are using statistics or whatever. What is the core claim? Are they saying we are basically buying stocks that have started moving and we basically just ride the trend, or we are buying stocks that are cheap, or we are buying high quality companies? Those are simple claims. Versus you can have very complicated claims also. So we buy stocks that are exposed to certain risks and things like that. So the core claim, or sometimes when you have AI based AI-based strategies, there might be no core claim at all. All they will say is that, look, we've got so many parameters and we've trained a model to identify what's a good stock, and then it buys it. And again, it might work, but in finance especially, so AI is very, very effective at doing common tasks that we do, that like driving a car, etc. Maybe they've got.
Parijat, I'll just interject one sec. So we will also want to take a few questions, and on the interest of time, so you please cover all the important points. But I'll urge you to, just move a little faster, because we want to take a few questions. We have a lot of good questions also. So yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I completely lost track of time. I'm going to.
I think the audience is enjoying it, but we also want to take a few questions.
Of course.
So please carry on, and I don't want to miss out anything. Yeah.
So I'll then. Does it aim to time the market? This is similar to the question I just said. Is it timing the market? And if it is timing the market, how many times does it, in the backtest period, did it only have to take 2 decisions, or did it have to take 180 decisions? And we've seen how that works and which ones are better. For example, this is the example. This is an actual fund that is available in the market today. I just took it from their pitch. This strategy tries to evaluate the macro conditions and decides whether to invest or whether to remain hedged. This can be a good thing or a bad thing. You want to ask the fund manager, how often does it decide to stay in and out? How often does it change its mind? If it has only done it 3 times in the last 15 years, you want to be a little scared of that. It says it decides every month, and we are in and out, and that's actually sounds bad, but it's actually a better thing. It's more likely to work. What is the backtest period? Is the strategy that is being pitched to you, have they tested it for 3 years, 4 years, or have they tested it for 15 years? And again, it's possible they've only tested it for 5 years, and there can be good reasons for it, because certain kinds of data, for example, have become available in the last 5 years. But you want to ask, why did you choose that specific backtest period? Could you have tested it for a longer period, etc.? That is a question that you want to ask. What is the trading frequency? This is one of the taxonomies. Why does this matter? I will take a very interesting example here. We'll not run this poll in the interest of time. But, so somebody told me recently, and this was a discussion on Twitter as well, that, all the money in the market is actually made overnight. So if you just bought Nifty at the close of market and you sold it in the morning and you were not exposed during the day, you would have made far more money than if you just bought and held the index, right? So intraday you lose money, and then overnight you make money. So somebody can build a strategy which says, okay, at the end of the day, I will buy index futures, and the next day I will sell at the open. So theoretically, all of this works, right? Your backtest might actually say that this works, but the transaction costs, because you're trading every day, you're trading your entire portfolio in and out every day, the transaction costs itself actually work out to the point where you make 0 money. On the other hand, there's a strategy which says I buy cheapest 20% of the stocks and I hold them for 3 months. Okay, and then 3 months later I rebalance. In strategy 2, the transaction costs matter much less. So any backtests that are there, any performance that is there, is much less likely to be impacted by trading costs when the trading frequency is much lower. So that trade-off you have to look at. So if somebody says that the trading strategy trades a lot, the question you want to ask is, have you considered transaction costs? How much transaction costs have you considered, etc.? If it does not trade too much, then you don't care too much about transaction costs. I'm getting to the end. Investment universe. This actually has a bearing in 2 ways. If the strategy is investing only in small cap stocks, supposing they buy only stocks worth 500, 600 crores, then the transaction costs can be quite high. And this is not just brokerage cost. The backtests can seem like it's a very lucrative strategy. But in the market, when you try and execute, you will not get the price that you see. You don't get the liquidity, etc. So in reality, those strategies might not end up working. On the other hand, if the investment universe is the Nifty 50 stocks, these are typically very liquid, all of them are quite liquid stocks, then the likelihood of the backtest being correct is higher. Again, I'm always talking in probabilities, but if the investment universe is large cap stocks, at least transaction costs and liquidity problems will not probably affect it in real time. But if it is investing only in small cap stocks, you want to be more worried about that. When to ask for a track record? See, if a strategy says you have to invest for at least 5 years to effectively beat the market, then asking for a track record to be honest, is not going to be very useful because you're not going to get it. But within that, if the strategy is one that trades every day or say every week, then you can say that I want a track record and I'm going to wait. On the other hand, if a strategy is only going to trade say 6 months or once a year, then even if you were to wait for 1 year or 2 years and then look at that track record, it's not really going to tell you anything. It might look good and the strategy could still be bad. It might look bad and the strategy could still be good. So track record, you have to really, whether it makes sense, over what period of time the strategy is expected to make money is something that you use to decide, at least in quant, at least right now, whether you need to look at a track record or whether back tests are enough. You want to consider post-tax performance. I'm not going to talk too much about this. And the final big one is AI good or bad? Should I be buying an AI-based fund or not? The answer to that is it really depends. AI is not a magic bullet. AI is just another statistical method to build portfolios. And therefore, all the questions that we've just asked, they apply, right? Is it AI models? To be honest, I'm a computer science guy. I love AI, but I would say that in finance, if you've got too many parameters, the chances of overfitting are higher. But if the person or the team that has created the strategy understands exactly what is going on and why it is making the choices it's making, it can be a good thing. But certainly don't be bamboozled by the fact that when somebody tells you we look at 5,000 different parameters for each company, or we construct 20 million portfolios and choose the best one, etc. This is all jargon. It doesn't matter. What you want to look at and get answers to are the questions that we've posed. Whether there is overfitting likely, whether there is transaction costs that might be a problem, whether it fits the needs of your portfolio. Those are the questions to ask. And and you should do quite well with these funds. Yeah, I'm done, Sankalpo.
Right. So we will take few questions now. So all the questions about overfitting, I'm going to wait a while before taking overfitting questions, because I think we've spoken quite a bit about overfitting in general. Okay. So one question that I have is from Arjun. So Arjun asks, what software do you use to backtest strategies? How is the backtest performed? How do you control drawdowns? And what are the average drawdowns? Now, what we will do is, it's okay if you don't want to answer the software wala thing. I'm not sure if it's compliance allowed, but we would definitely want to know a bit about the backtesting strategy, because this is a fund that I'm sure, or public funds will see public money. So it's important that they understand how backtesting is done.
Yeah. So again, backtesting varies a lot depending on the type of strategy. So for example, if you've got a strategy that trades every day, then what you want to be able to do, for example, is look at what is known as tick data or intraday data to see, because the more you trade, the more sensitive your strategy is to even 5 paisa, 10 paisa, 20 paisa movements in price. And so you want to look at exactly what the order book looked like in the market. Those kind of strategies need fairly sophisticated systems to be able to backtest. On the other hand, a factor strategy which rebalances, say, on a 3-month basis or a 6-month basis, those are actually pretty straightforward to backtest, in the sense that you could theoretically even do that in Excel. What you only need is a database of prices and dividends and corporate actions, etc. And again, it's fairly straightforward to do it even in Excel. There is a certain amount of nuance there. These strategies assume that you will get the closing price of the day. For example, a lot of these strategies will assume that. So because if you assume that you want to execute in the market and you want to look at very granular data, that becomes very hard. So what we usually do is you assume the closing price that you get from NSE. Also, you can use that, and we make some adjustments for transaction costs. We assume that maybe there is a 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.3% hit that you will take. And based on that, you can test whether a strategy makes money over time. So again, depending on the trading frequency, the backtesting strategy can differ a lot.
Right. So I hope that answers the question on backtesting and how it actually happens. So I've got another very interesting question, and this was sent to me on WhatsApp by one of our listeners live. So he says that, when you travel, let's say from Bombay to Goa or Delhi to Jaipur, and you travel strictly following the Google Maps route, and often, the Google Map shows you a shortcut or, something that saves time, and you might end up spending more time, or, it becomes a more costlier way for you, or something like that happens. And the context that he asked was that a lot of Western fund managers, following quant techniques, have taken cash calls last year during the COVID phase, and post which S&P 500, Nasdaq, any index had one of the best times in their lives. So, how do you factor these? Because a March 2020 might not happen ever again for a very long time, or might happen tomorrow also, I'm not sure. But how does the machine or the boundaries of the quant strategy factor in such incidences?
So I love the question. And that's exactly the point. So one thing is, look, if a fund manager if a quant fund manager took an outside cash call, that itself is anathema. That is not to be done. If your fund manager did that and he was sold you a fully systematic quant fund and he took a cash call, you withdraw your money no matter what he does for anybody else tomorrow, right? Because he did not stick to the mandate. That is point number one. As for strategies that try to predict these events, this is exactly the sort of thing I was saying. If you think that your strategies are going to catch these kind of events, and you think that your quant model or your fund manager says, I've got a quant model that can predict these things, I would be extremely skeptical. Because like you said, this happens maybe once in a decade. There is just no way the world stands and looks the same when these things happen. What you want is a strategy that is resilient to weird outcomes or weird happenings, not one that tries to predict. I would not bet my money on a quant fund that basically tries to predict these kind of events.
Right. So your answer would be that if somebody took a cash call in a quant fund or did something out of their mandate or scope, you should not be, invested with him or her, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's a fair answer. So I'm going to take one question on, factors and, overfitting, because a lot of people have asked about it and you spend some time on it. So the question is that when you get a portfolio of different sectors, different businesses, different market caps, obviously, the variables will increase. Okay. So, you spoke at length, but just in 2 minutes, can you tell us how to create that blend? Okay. Of, avoiding overfitting and including apt variables in the quant thesis.
So the first thing, I don't know if I fully understand the question, but the idea is in a factor investing strategy, the idea is always to take variables that make economic sense, right? That is the first most important thing. You don't go and arbitrarily combine variables. So for example, you don't go about multiplying revenue by your trade payables, for example. Right? Mathematically, all of that is possible. But and if you throw an arbitrary system at all of these variables, it will do all of that, and it might find something. But you will pick variables that make economic sense, right? So you can say I'm going to look at debt to equity, okay? And again, your intuition, if your intuition says that very high debt to equity should over the long run do badly, and your system actually comes back and says it does very well, again, you want to be very, very skeptical about that, right? So good quant managers will constantly think about the economic rationale for why a variable makes sense and whether the actual outcome of buying something based on that variable is working with the intuition and not against it. Something can look like alpha, but if it does not make economic sense, then it's probably going to kill you in the future.
Right. So you look at what is relevant to the portfolio that you're looking at. So I hope that answers the question, and I find it very interesting, about the blend. So another interesting question that I have got for you, a lot of fund managers have been using this quote, the proof of pudding is in eating it. Okay. So a lot of active managers use this to explain their strategies. So the question that I'm going to ask you is that, so active fund management in India, bottoms up or tops down, has a history of probably 25, 30 years now. Okay, quants is coming, the vintage is low. there are very few people who've been doing it. So how do you compare, let's say if someone has only 50 lakhs to give to invest in equities, or that is the allocation that he wants to take, how does he or she compare the two? Because they are not apples, like they're apples and oranges. So how would you, suggest or advise someone to compare these two options?
So there are two things. One is obviously if you have 50 lakhs to invest, then AIFs are anyways out of the question, right? You're looking at only mutual funds. That is point number one. And the good thing about mutual funds is you can make a small allocation, right? There's nobody saying that you have to invest at least 20% of your portfolio. If you don't feel super comfortable, start with 20,000, start with 50,000, right? And see how it goes over time. So that is one thing. It's natural to not feel comfort with newfangled things. On the other hand, it's natural to feel that humans are bad. There's enough people in my generation who would say I would prefer a machine over a human making these decisions, because so much has been drilled into us that this active fund management doesn't work and ye sab bakwas hai, only buy index funds, etc. But so you can have your biases, but in a mutual fund format you can make as small an allocation as you want. That is point number one. Two is, like I said, you want to look at the context of your own portfolio, right? If you've got money in certain funds, and I don't think the tools are yet available where people can quickly look at the analysis that I did, right? Fund one was very high in value and low exposure to growth, etc. I'm sure the tools can come in and we can help with that over time. You just plug those holes, right? You look at very basic things and you say, okay, I'm going to not trust too much, but here is what I want to plug that risk in my portfolio. I want to make sure I don't miss out on certain things, and you make some allocation to it. Again, so depending on how gung-ho you feel about it, you can make big or small allocations. And then over time you experience and you pay attention to what the original fund manager said, and whether they stuck to it, whether they actually delivered on it. And where delivery, by the way, is very importantly not just alpha. We tend to look at, if I got performance, this is a good fund manager. That's not really how it works, especially in quant. You want to see whether they stuck to their mandate and still managed to do well for you.
Right. So that's a very interesting take, and I think that works both for active as well as quant-driven kind of strategies. So we'll take. So this is the last question that we'll take, and post which we will just take your comments as the representative of the quant investment fraternity. The question is, how do you see quant adding a stability or value to the portfolio? It can be either or anything, some value to the portfolio. And the other thing is, and the second part to it is, apart from the indices, would you like to, because there's a lot of questions about it, would you like to name some popular quant funds that are around where investors can take a look at? So yeah, over to you.
So in terms of adding value, like I mentioned, again, you can, if you like certain things about a market, if you've heard, what the hell I'm going to say. So you've heard Saurabh Mukherjee talk about quality stocks, for example, right? And it's done well. It has a history, and you say, I want to invest in that, right? So one thing is you could do your own research and you can buy those stocks, or you could buy a quant fund, like a quality quant fund. So far as I know, there isn't one yet. Hopefully there will be one soon if we can do something about it. So you can think of it in those terms, making specific bets. That's where the value can come from. Or two, if you can understand again the gaps in your portfolio. If you want to buy a low volatility, so there are some ETFs. For example, there's a Kotak NV20, I think it's called. It's the low volatility part of the Nifty index. You could buy that if you want a low volatility component in your portfolio. So there are definitely funds that are coming out to meet those kind of requirements. So you can do that, and then obviously there will be some that claim multi-factor funds that claim to generate actual alpha. Again, make an allocation to it, and if you're like most people, maybe you've got a SIP in a couple of funds, maybe add a quant fund, see how it goes. Again, look at the presentations. Do not just buy a quant fund because it's a quant fund. Just read it. There is no rocket science. Do not feel intimidated. Read through it if it makes sense, and don't be blown away by fancy stuff. In finance, especially, simple works better usually. The more complicated, the more likely it's to blow up. If it intuitively makes sense, it's not super jargon, full of jargon, make an allocation. That's the way to go at this stage, I think. So in fact, so if you can actually just Google, I think maybe on the Amphi website, there's probably if you look at a thematic category, you will find quant funds, or just look for quant fund on Value Research and some should come up. And
right.
Yeah, the brochures and presentations should be there.
So that's not a suggestion, guys. Again, so now we'll take the closing notes from you. Just a couple of minutes or 1 minute, whatever you feel like, as a representative of the quant investing fraternity in India. And then we will, wrap up today's episode and the series on quant investing.
Sure. One, please don't. I just hope you're saying representative. A lot of people might actually come and club me and say, "Who made you the representative?" But no. So just a few things. One, it is okay to be a little skeptical of fancy new things, especially in finance. But I can tell you, it may be slightly new in India. It's been a practice, 30, 40 years practice in the US. It's a huge industry. It's not a fly-by-night thing. Two, do not be intimidated by the fact that this is all statistics, etc. You can still apply a very normal person's thinking. Just read the presentations. Just ask the basic questions. Just think clearly and be able to ask questions. You should be okay doing that. It's actually not very hard to tell the potentially not great ones versus at least decent funds. So do take the time to read any presentations that you get, decks that you get. Feel free to ask questions. If anybody refuses to answer questions about their strategy, saying, "Oh no, this is a very proprietary," you can always pass. And it's a new category. It's a new world. It's worth making some allocation and see how that goes.
Right, that was precise and very apt. So I thank you all for coming out and taking time for this 2-part series on demystifying quant investing, which is probably the next big theme in India. And we learned a lot. So what I personally take away is, as an investor, I'm going to make some allocation in quant-based strategies, and how essentially a quant strategy will work. It's something very simple and it's something very defined, and something that defines a scope before investing, and which might add a lot of value to a lot of investors. And one can start making allocation as per their need and understand. And as the space evolves, more products come. I think it could somewhere be at least 30-40% of an equity portfolio in the coming days. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for being on the call. We look forward to other such exciting sessions. Thank you, Parijat.
Thanks, Sankalpo. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.